The restaurant buzzed with quiet energy. The clink of glasses, the soft hum of conversations, and the distant laughter of diners blended into a rhythm that Sophie had learned to navigate like a second heartbeat. But tonight something felt different. As she approached table 14, where a man in a tailored suit sat with two companions, the man was tall and commanding, his eyes scanning the room with a precision that made her stomach twist. The others leaned in too close, their smiles too sharp, and Sophie felt a cold prickle of unease crawling up her spine because she knew instinctively that danger lurked even in the elegant calm of this room. As she poured the wine, she noticed a subtle flicker in the hand of the man across the table, a glint of something slipping into the glass before she could react. The liquid shimmered for a split second, and Sophie realized with a jolt that this was no ordinary dinner, and she froze her pulse, hammering against her chest because she could not speak here. She could not warn him without risking her job or drawing attention, and yet every instinct screamed that she had to act fast before it was too late for the man who had unknowingly become the target of something far more sinister than she had ever imagined. Sophie stepped back and pulled her order pad from her apron with hands that shook. She scribbled a quick message, her pen moving faster than her racing thoughts. Do not drink it. Leave. Now she folded the paper carefully. Slipping it under his napkin with a trembling finger, she dared not look up too long, afraid the moment would vanish and her courage would fail. But when she glanced at him, his eyes met hers in a flash of understanding, a silent connection that held the weight of life and death. And in that instant, Sophie realized she had set events into motion that she could not control. The man picked up the napkin slowly, his expression unreadable. Sophie watched her heart leap as he unfolded the note. His gaze flicking up to hers, the silence stretching between them thick and electric. She held her breath, imagining every possible scenario and every outcome darker than the one before it, because the two men across the table shifted in their seats, noticing the change in the air, their smiles faltering as the tension coiled tighter and tighter around the table, and Sophie felt the room itself grow colder as though the walls were closing in on them. Then he stood his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that drew every eye in the private dining area. He placed his glass down, set the napkin gently atop it, and spoke in a calm, measured voice that carried an authority no one could challenge. The two men froze, their expressions flickering between confusion and alarm, and Sophie felt her pulse pound in her ears because she knew this was the moment when everything could change for better or worse, and she could not predict which path the next step would take them down. He walked toward the exit with deliberate steps, and Sophie followed instinctively, her stomach twisting, because she did not know whether he trusted her completely or if the danger had only just begun. Outside, the city lights flickered against the darkened streets, casting long shadows. And as they stepped out, she noticed a black car idling at the curb, its presence sudden and unsettling, and a figure emerging from the driver's side, moving with the precision of someone trained to act in seconds, and Sophie realized, with a shiver, that her life and the life of the man she had just saved were now intertwined in a web of danger that had only begun to tighten. The black car idled with its engine whispering menace in the cold night air. The figure moving toward them was tall and precise, his steps silent but deadly. Sophie felt her stomach knot as the man stopped a few feet away, watching them with eyes that held nothing human, just calculation, and she instinctively stepped closer to the CEO as if her presence could shield him, though she knew it could not, because danger was not something that could be held back by courage alone. The CEO turned his head slightly, giving her a look that was equal parts reassurance and command. He whispered, "Stay behind me," and Sophie nodded, her hands trembling. Though she tried to keep them still, her heart pounding like a drumbeat that matched the tension rippling through the empty street. The man in black raised his hand slowly, and Sophie caught a flash of metal, glinting in the dim light, and her breath froze because she knew the weapon was real and the threat was imminent. Suddenly, another figure appeared from the shadows, moving swiftly to intercept the black-suited man, and chaos erupted as footsteps collided. The night filled with sounds that made Sophie's ears ring: the scrape of shoes against pavement, the quick intake of breath, the low command whispered under the streetlights, and she realized with a sick twist in her stomach that the men in the restaurant were not alone. They had backup. They had planned this meticulously, and somehow she had stumbled into the center of a trap that was far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The CEO reacted instantly, his movements precise and controlled. Sophie watched as he deflected a sudden strike with the smoothness of someone who had faced life-threatening situations countless times, before his hand grabbed the attacker's wrist and twisted it just enough to force him to stagger backward. He did not speak, only moved with the economy of motion that left Sophie in awe, because in that instant she understood that the calm man at the table was more than a CEO. He was someone who could survive when all hope seemed lost. Sophie wanted to speak to, warn him of the second man sneaking closer from the right, but her voice caught in her throat. A scream swallowed by the night, she could only watch as the CEO spun and intercepted the attacker with a motion so fast it was almost invisible, his eyes never leaving hers, as if to tell her stay safe and move back now, and she obeyed. Stepping behind a parked car pressed against its cold metal, her body trembling as the sound of scuffle and grunts filled the street and the adrenaline rushing through. Her veins made her feel alive and terrified at the same time. Seconds stretched like hours as the attackers faltered under the CEO's skill, his movements fluid, ruthless, and precise, and Sophie could not tear her eyes away. The black-suited men were no longer the predators they seemed moments ago, but formidable, yet clearly human, and the CEO used every advantage: the streetlight shadows, the parked cars, the sudden turns and shifts to gain the upper hand. And Sophie realized with a shiver that he had been ready for something like this all along. He had known the danger could come, and he had anticipated it. Every move she had seen was calculated. Then the first attacker fell hard to the pavement, coughing and clutching his wrist. The second hesitated a fraction too long, and the CEO seized the opportunity, grabbing him and twisting him down with a controlled force that left him stunned. Sophie could see the shock in the men's eyes, the realization that they had miscalculated the quiet confidence that radiated from the CEO like armor. And she felt a mix of awe and fear, because this was a side of him no one in the restaurant had seen. And she wondered what else lay hidden behind his calm professional exterior. Police sirens wailed. In the distance, growing closer and closer, the attackers released and ran, disappearing into the night before officers arrived. The CEO finally exhaled a slow breath that seemed to carry months of tension. Sophie stepped forward cautiously, and he reached out a hand and said quietly, "Are you all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. The words stuck in her throat, her body still trembling from the terror and the adrenaline surge, and he looked at her with a faint smile, a mixture of gratitude and recognition that made her heart pound, because she realized he understood that without her quick thinking, he might not have survived the first attack. Once the police arrived, the officers moved quickly, securing the area, taking statements from witnesses. And the attackers had vanished, leaving only fragments of their plan behind, and Sophie watched as the CEO spoke with the officers, calmly authoritative, yet relaxed, as though the battle had not drained him at all, and she felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering fear. Because the note she had slipped him was just the beginning, and the night had revealed dangers that were deeper and more sinister than she could have imagined. Finally, they walked back toward the restaurant, the city lights reflecting off wet asphalt like a warning signal flashing in her mind. The CEO turned to her and said softly, "You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You saved more than just my life tonight." Sophie realized that her ordinary job as a waitress had suddenly become extraordinary. She had acted when it mattered, and the world she had known had shifted forever, because now she was part of a story that was dangerous, thrilling, and real, and she understood that her life would never be the same again. As they reached the entrance, he paused and looked at her with eyes that seemed to see everything, the danger, the courage, the fear, and the determination, and he said, "One day, this will all make sense to you, but for now, go home and rest, knowing that you did the right thing." Sophie nodded silently, her heart still racing. Because even as she walked away, she could feel that the night had left its mark on her, that the memory of danger and heroism would stay with her, and that the world was larger, darker, and far more unpredictable than she had ever imagined.